What is up, guys? It's your buddy Blue Spooky here with another daily video. Your standard 1 hour and 30-minute affair. If you guys end up enjoying this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite things about doing these videos is reading your guys' comments, even if I can't always respond to them. Last but not least, if you'd like to go that extra step and support the channel even more than you do by just watching the video already, go ahead and click that join button next to the subscribe button. It's $2 a month at the lowest tier, and you get a special icon next to your name when you comment, and special emoticons that you can use when you comment as well. No content will be locked behind the paywall, of course. It's simply something extra you can do if you'd like to support the channel a little more. Either way, I will get right into the video, and I hope you guys enjoy the true scary stories. Thanks for watching. This happened when I was at university. My friend had just moved into a new apartment, so me and a bunch of friends decided to drop in on him. His place wasn't new, but it wasn't exactly old either. It was the very definition of pretty decent. His apartment was 3 stories high. There was a narrow staircase leading to the entrance, and a little path leading to the room on the ground floor. Opposite from this was a bicycle parking area. My friend's room was on the corner of the 2nd floor of that complex. On that day, I remember there being a lot of rain. We went to the local supermarket to get some beers and some snacks. We were heading back to his room to surprise him when we went into his apartment. I put my bag down, followed by my umbrella, when suddenly one of my friends shouted, "What's the matter with you?" I jumped out of my skin practically. We all looked at my friend who'd suddenly shouted, then followed his eye line. He was looking over the stairs towards the bicycle parking area. There was a woman stood beneath a flickering light in the corridor. She stood out completely because for some reason she was dressed entirely in black. She looked to be about 30 or 40 and had long dark hair too. Her hair was jet black just like her clothes were. Because of how camouflaged she was, it almost looked like her white face was just floating in the darkness. This mystery woman was just stood there staring at all of us. No, she wasn't staring in our direction really. It was as if she had this 1,000-yard stare, staring at something beyond us. We were surprised, needless to say. We gave her a little bow as an apology. We felt bad for staring at her and yelling at her just because she'd surprised us. As soon as we walked into his apartment, we started to talk about that woman. She was pretty creepy. Man, that was kind of weird, huh? Yeah, that was scary. I mean, what the hell is she doing down there? Does she even live here? If she did live here, I wondered why she didn't just go over to her own apartment instead of just standing there in the corridor. Hey, come on guys, don't freak me out. I just moved in here. We drank beers and played some games and completely forgot about that woman. Later, when we were out of beers, 2 of my friends wanted to go on a beer run. Me and the owner of the apartment decided to stay behind and wait for them. Within 5 minutes though, they suddenly burst back in. Hey, guys, why don't we all go? That woman is still standing there staring at your apartment. It's way too creepy to go alone. My friend who just moved in was too freaked out to go though, and since the rest of us were pretty buzzed, we went to go get the drinks together. We joked that it was kind of like a dare or something. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I took a glance toward the place we'd seen her last, and sure enough, there she was, standing in the exact same spot, staring off into nothingness. What the hell? While we were on our way to the convenience store, we talked about her more. I said that when we got back, I'd go say hello to her and see if she was all right. I'd let them know what happened. I was curious about her, and I was also a little bit concerned. However, when we got back, she wasn't there anymore. Deep down, I was actually a little relieved. We did find her sudden disappearance mysterious though, I mean, she'd been out there for quite a long time. I stayed over and left my friend's house the next morning. Surprisingly, nothing else strange happened at all that night. A few weeks went by and I bumped into my friend who'd moved in. He told me he was thinking of moving out already. What? You're already moving? Dude, you just moved in like a week ago. He looked at the floor and just said, "That woman, I can't deal with it, man." According to my friend, that woman appeared every single rainy day and just stood in the exact same spot under the light in the bicycle parking area. Every time it rained, he couldn't help getting frightened watching her stare at his apartment for hours on end. I couldn't understand that woman's behavior, sure, but I thought my friend moving out because of it was kind of unnecessary. It's not like she even tried to do anything to him. My friend then told me, though, that he'd tried to start a conversation with the woman to see what was up with her. That's pretty brave, I thought. Apparently, the conversation went something like this. Hi there. I moved in on the second floor recently. I'm sorry about the other night. My friends and I were a bit loud. She didn't say anything. She didn't even look up at him. She just continued to kind of stare through him into the distance and didn't say a single word. He even contacted the owner of the building, but nothing ever came of it. Whenever it rains, even if it's the morning or the middle of the night, somehow she'll always be standing right there. He told me she always just stood there, staring off into space. She didn't do anything to anyone, but it was too creepy for him to bear. He wanted to move away from there as fast as he could. At first, I thought maybe she was a ghost or something, but obviously she's not. She only stands there whenever it rains, and I remembered obviously seeing the rain impacting on her, so it's definitely not something paranormal. I wonder why. I wonder what she saw or what happened to her that made her like this. After a few months, my friend was able to move out. He never found out who that woman was, and no one he asked about her seemed to know either. Possibly she even still stands in that corner beneath that gloomy light on every rainy day. I had just moved into my own place not long after graduating from high school. I went to study in the technical school outside of my hometown. It was the first time I had ever lived by myself, and it was there that something very creepy happened to me. My mom helped me pick the apartment. She wanted to make sure it was a safe place to live. I'm the sort of girl who's lived a very sheltered life, and my mom is a warrior type. This place is so close to the school, everyone will be able to save you, and you'll be in the public view, she said. Sometimes, however, protection can be very annoying. I had my own anxieties about moving in, but overall I was excited by the freedom of having my own place. Several days later, my TV arrived. The one I'd ordered was not a very big one. It took just one person to deliver it. The delivery man brought it to my room. As I looked at it, I thought to myself, what am I supposed to do with this? Looking back on it, it was pretty embarrassing that I didn't know how to wire or set up a TV myself. I still don't really. There are many things I didn't have the opportunity to learn. The delivery man looked at me for a moment and asked politely, "Do you need some help with this?" I was so grateful, I invited him in. He seemed like an expert. The TV was set up and installed in no time at all. At that point, I blurted out, "Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much." I was really grateful for his help. The next day, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I went over to the peephole to have a look and see who it could be. Needless to say, I was very surprised to see the guy who had installed the TV was there yet again. What is this guy doing here? I wondered. Panic began to stir up inside of me. I thought I'd just ignore it and pretend to be out. From that point onward, though, he began to show up and ring my doorbell every day. I was getting really frightened now. He was showing up every single day. It was horrible. Sometimes he wouldn't even ring the doorbell, but I still checked and saw he was there. I didn't say a word. I just kept on ignoring him. I mean, what else could I really do? This guy was really creepy and would not go away. I was here all by myself though. I was just praying that one of these times he wouldn't get impatient and start kicking the door down. One day, after a while of silence, I was wondering if he had gone away already. I crept over to the peephole to check. "Ah, there you are. Can you open the door now?" he said, with a big smirk on his face. After that, I went to one of my college friends' apartments as often as I could. I was pretty sure I was inconveniencing my friend. They kept asking me what was wrong, but I didn't really want to talk about it. I just dodged the question. All of this was due to my meek personality. I wanted to go back to my place, but I also wanted to take my friend with me, just in case. I didn't know how I would react if I went back and that guy was there waiting. When I finally explained what was going on, they told me I was just overreacting. My friend told me that my reaction to him and letting him in to set up my TV might have led him on. Maybe he interpreted my gratitude as affection. I thought that a man like that should know not to bother a young woman living alone though. Because of what my friend said though, I didn't really know what to do. After a while, he finally gave up and went away, and I haven't heard from him since. I still get terrified every time I hear the doorbell ring though. And please be careful if you live alone, especially if you're a woman, and especially if you have a non-confrontational personality like me. There used to be an abandoned rubber factory on the edge of my town. Before it was torn down a couple of years back, I decided to go exploring there once. I tried all the doors, but they were all barred. I did, however, find a crack in a concrete wall around the back that was just big enough for me to slip through and get inside. It was really neat in there. There were abandoned things that must have been in storage for decades, a bunch of old conveyor belts and factory equipment, all kinds of paraphernalia as well. I even found a random painting of Jesus in a makeshift shrine. That's not the creepy part though. I was walking around exploring this abandoned factory. It was about 8 p.m. or so, just after it got completely dark. I looked around for an hour or so, and aside from all that old shit, there was really nothing out of the ordinary. And that was when I started to hear some music playing, something bluesy, somewhere deeper in the factory. I'm not easily scared, and I kind of wanted to figure out what sort of freak was listening to old records in an abandoned factory, because honestly, that sounded like something I would do. I tracked down the noise after about 5 to 10 minutes. I could tell it was coming from a room further down, somewhere in what must have been the basement. There was a doorway covered with a tarp. I went inside. The room was a huge contrast with the rest of the dingy old factory. The walls were bright purple, and the room was warm like there was a space heater in it or something, whereas the rest of the area was completely freezing. As I walked in further, I saw there was a cassette player just laying there on the floor, playing a song which I later tracked down to be Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. I never found out what the other songs that had been playing were, but I guess that doesn't really matter. I noticed a bunch of papers taped to the walls. They all said, "She gotta run, she gotta run." If I were to guess, there were at least 100 sheets that said the exact same phrase, just plastered over all the walls. Laying on the floor, there was a chair that looked like it had been detached from a school desk. In the corner, there was a statue of some animal that was really badly chipped and burned, like someone had tried to destroy it. I also noted there was a stack of VHS tapes that had the names of women on the sides. I only remember seeing Jessica on multiple tapes, but there were a few other names. I left shortly after, because I got worried whoever owned all of this would come back and find me snooping around. Heck, I figured they might have already been in the building with me. I couldn't stop thinking about this for a few weeks. I was convinced it was either a serial killer or some guy with a real collection he couldn't risk having at home. Maybe something even worse was on those tapes. I went back with a friend, but when we got there, they had already started demolishing the place, and it was inaccessible. I'll always wonder what was on those tapes, but a part of me is very glad I'll never know. I think my love for collecting cards stems back from my early childhood, when my dad and I used to open packs together. I remember specifically going around and grabbing Pokemon cards and Beanie Babies when I was a kid. Usually, if I did good on a test or got a good report card, I could get a pack of cards or something that my dad and I would look at together. Now fast forward about 20 years. I still collect the cards and enjoy opening them with my friends and family. I learned pretty early on in collecting that I couldn't keep everything, so I sold off most of my collection and only really keep items of value that I have the space for or that have some sentimental value to me. The pandemic surge really made me wish I held on to some of those items longer though. Anyway, I don't really collect anything specifically, just items that catch my eye, ranging from horror cards like Jaws and Fright Flicks to Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Even some occasional football or basketball cards as well. For years, I belonged to forums, which then morphed into Facebook and Reddit pages. On these sites, you meet tons of people who like to share their collections, trade, and even sell cards to each other. I made a few acquaintances and even a couple of friends over the years through these different forms of media, but one experience I had always sticks out more than the others. That was the time I met Roger. Roger was someone I met online, who also had an interest in error cards. You know, something is off-center or perhaps misprinted during the manufacturing process. We talked casually for what I would guesstimate was 6 to 8 months, until he sent me a message about a card convention. The message stuck out to me because I remember him saying, "Hey, I saw this collectible card convention and card show that wasn't far from where you are. Are you considering going maybe?" I remember my immediate response was, "How do you know that show is close to me?" I don't discuss my city or state online. I don't remember the exact response he gave, but I think he said something along the lines that he'd picked it up from my socials and some of the pictures I'd posted. Either way, I said, yeah, I was planning on going to the convention to look around, maybe even thin out my collection a little. He mentioned that he was also attending, and that we should meet up IRL and get a drink or coffee or take a tour of the convention together. I agreed and figured there wouldn't really be any harm in meeting someone I'd chatted with pretty regularly, especially in a public setting like a convention. The day came and I was waiting to meet up with Roger. I got a tap on the shoulder and turned around. Can I help you?" "Hey, it's me, Roger," I responded pretty quickly. "Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize you. You look so different than you do on all your socials." "Oh yeah, I took all those pictures a long time ago." I remember trying to steer the conversation. "Well, it's good to finally meet you." I was thinking to myself though, this is a completely different person to the images on the social media pages. They looked nothing alike, not even remotely close. Before I could even process anything else though, Roger said, "I want to introduce you to my friend Todd." I stuck out my hand, but this Todd guy completely ignored it and didn't say anything to me. Don't worry, he's just shy. He'll warm up eventually." I was already regretting my decision to meet up with someone I didn't really know that well. I said we should go in and take a look around. Everyone agreed and we all headed in. In all honesty, it was an amazing show. There were so many cool collectibles and cards. I didn't end up getting anything for myself that day though. Like I said, at the time I was trying to thin out my collection, rather than increase its size. As we approached different areas and booths, I became more comfortable being around Todd and Roger. Todd was quite rude though, and Roger just seemed to go along with everything he said. I ended up getting very quiet eventually, and even though I had seen a lot of cool things with them, I was trying to plan my escape from these people. Roger had to run to the bathroom eventually, and I was left alone with Todd. Well, I think I'm gonna head out when Roger gets back. I have some stuff to take care of when I get home. For the very first time that day, Todd turned and looked at me. He spoke in a very firm voice. "No, you're not. We made this trip all the way here, and you're gonna make it worthwhile for us." I asked him what he meant, but just as he was about to respond, Roger came back and interrupted. "All right, guys, what's up next?" I said I had to head home because I had a lot of stuff to do with my family. Roger's smile immediately turned to a frown. "Well, if you want to be rude and take off, that's your choice." I ignored it and got up. I walked off as fast as I could. At that point, the first thing I was thinking was that I was going to block Roger on any app we had together. I got home and told my wife what happened. She seemed disinterested and said something like, "I told you everyone online is creepy." I tried to put the events from that day out of my head, but I was still feeling a bit uneasy and anxious. I decided to go to bed early around 8:30 or so. I was woken up to a loud bang at 1 a.m. I couldn't tell what it was, but it sounded like a table or chair had been tipped over. I told my wife to go back to sleep, and I would go check out what it was. I looked around the house and couldn't really find anything out of place. I went down to the basement though, and what I saw still gives me a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach whenever I think about it. I saw Todd from earlier, grabbing storage totes and carrying them up my storm doors. If you don't know what those are, they're like the Wizard of Oz basement doors that lead to your backyard directly from your basement. I screamed. "What the hell is going on here?" Todd dropped the totes and flew up the stairs. I tried to follow, but by the time I got up, he had run past the fence that had been open and jumped into a black van. It then sped off. I think it took a good 10 to 15 minutes for everything to sink in and for my adrenaline to lower. I went inside and told my wife, and we called the police immediately. I told them everything about Roger and Todd, from my conversations over several months with Roger, all the way up to meeting them that day. The police said they most likely gained information on some items in my collection and scheduled the meetup to try and tell me and find out where those items were located. It made sense, honestly. I don't have any other idea how Roger would have found out where I lived. That's assuming Roger was actually involved, which I told the police that he would have had to have been. Nothing ever really came from the investigation though, and unfortunately I didn't have enough info for the police to do anything about it. They hadn't managed to actually steal very much, and honestly it was of little value what they did take, so I didn't really care. I was just glad my family and I were okay. I still open up cards every now and again with my wife, but if I do buy or sell, I do it through eBay or other selling sites now, and I always make sure to use my P.O. box as an address instead. I haven't been to any convention or card shows since this incident, and if I'm being honest, I don't see myself doing so at any point in the near future. This happened about 20 years ago when I was in high school. Our family had just moved into a brand new building. Every day was full of excitement in our new place. We used to live in a very small apartment, but our new one was very spacious. It was absolutely amazing to me. The new place was on the ground floor, and it even came with a garden as well. I just loved it. Opposite our garden was another big apartment. We could look outside and see people coming and going up and down the corridors to their homes. After a few weeks, though, my mother idly remarked, "Oh, the underwear I hung out to dry in the garden is gone. Do we have an underwear thief or something?" Because we live on the ground floor and the wall is quite big, I thought there was no way someone could have jumped over it and into our garden. It was way too high. Maybe they used a stick or a long pole with a hook or something to steal it off the line. I just know I didn't really want to think about it too much. One day, when I went out into the garden though, I could see a man on the 3rd or 4th floor in the building opposite to us. He was stood completely still, just blankly staring over at me. He looked to be in his 20s. He was wearing a sweatshirt, a tracksuit, and was very casual looking. He began walking down the corridor towards the stairs. He was going very slowly and kept eerily staring at me the whole time he was going. I was freaked out by his dead stare. A chill went up my spine, and eventually I couldn't bear to be in his sights anymore. I went back into my house and hid in my bedroom. Something about his staring felt so perverse. After this incident, we stopped drying our laundry in the garden. Sometime later, though, I noticed something. Something had been dropped in our garden. I took a bit of a closer look, and I noticed it was a set of tweezers. They weren't the everyday kind, though. They looked like they were the ones from a hospital or something, kind of like forceps. You know, the kind they use in operations. They had grips on their handles, and they were really long. Of course, they didn't belong to anyone in my family. No one knew who they belonged to, or where they'd come from. At this point, we'd noticed 3 weird things happening. The underwire going missing, the stranger staring at me, and now this big pair of tweezer-like things. It felt like someone was spying on our family, but for what purpose? Several days after I found the tweezers, the doorbell rang. My mother went to answer. I was at school at the time. A man was stood at the front door. My mother asked him what he wanted, and he replied in a kind of shy demeanor. I dropped my tweezers in your garden a few days ago, and I wanted to go get them. Any way you think about it, unless he threw them in, there's no way he could have just dropped them. Knowing this, my mother asked him how he had dropped them in our garden. He made up some excuse like, I live in the apartment over there. I was jumping up and down and they kind of fell out of my pocket into your yard. When I heard about this exchange later, I got real goosebumps. He jumped and they magically fell 10 meters across the way into our yard. All of his behavior was just completely odd. Jumping up and down in the corridor of an apartment block for no reason was weird anyway. Walking around with a huge pair of forceps was weird. Waiting a few days and coming back to get them from our garden, that was just scary. I got frightened. I imagined coming home from school and just seeing him in the garden with those tweezers in hand, terrifying my mother. She told him we didn't find anything in our garden. They weren't there, and she told him to leave right now. She told me she was going to be extra vigilant. She wouldn't open the door fully from then on, and kept the chain on as well. She hadn't wanted to look him in the eye when she'd seen him. She said his voice sounded young. She wouldn't be surprised if it was the strange guy who'd stared at me in the garden a few weeks past. After he came to our door, no more suspicious incidents occurred. I heard from a classmate who lived in the same building that the man who lived there had been arrested for stealing underwear. I have no idea if it was Mr. Tweezers or not. Even though he didn't cause me any direct harm, I guess because he didn't really get the chance, the idea that he had been watching me the whole time and was stealing my underwear was chilling. I stopped going out into the garden. If I had to go out there, I would make sure the time I spent there was as short as possible. This incident really shocked me, needless to say. It ruined all the joy of moving into a new place. Since then, whenever I've moved house, I've never chosen to live on the ground floor area. I had a really scary experience a couple of years ago. Now, during this time, I was back at my parents' house for the summer after my freshman year of college. I have a best friend named Jake, and he lived about 2 blocks away. We would walk to each other's houses all the time. We played video games together and played on the same basketball team in high school even. One night that summer, I was at home and in my bedroom. I had recently gotten back from my part-time summer job that I had. I went on Snapchat to respond to some snaps I'd gotten and see what was going on with all of my friends. I saw that Jake had posted a story. Jake would occasionally post Snapchat stories like most of my friends, but he wasn't known to post often or post anything crazy really. He was a pretty calm and chill guy, so what I saw that he'd posted was really odd and out of character for him. I noticed there were about 10 Snapchat videos from him, a few pictures as well. Each one seemed really random and hard to tell what it even was. Some appeared to be of the ground at nighttime, others of the floor of a house. In a few of them, you could even see other people's feet. You couldn't tell who anybody was though, and I couldn't make out anybody speaking in the videos either. It was just really bizarre and completely unlike him to be posting things like this. I responded and asked him what was going on exactly. Within minutes, he had seen my response. He opened it but didn't reply. The stories had all been posted an hour earlier. I really wanted to know what was going on. I decided to walk over to his house, even though it was like 10 o'clock at night. We were that close of friends. I walked the 10 minutes it took to get to his place, and then knocked on his front door. Jake answered it and asked me what was going on. I told him that I'd seen his weird stuff on Snapchat, and I was wondering if something was wrong with him. He was confused. He told me he didn't post anything. He went on to say that he'd lost his phone earlier that morning and he'd been trying to find it everywhere, but he couldn't find it no matter where he looked. He asked me what had been posted on his account. I went inside and we both went over the stuff that had been posted. I showed it to him. He realized that somebody must have found his phone and taken it. They were now posting to his Snapchat. Based on the videos and pictures themselves, there was really not much to go on. It's not like we were master detectives. We also didn't know why on earth somebody would take his phone and start posting these random things at all. We suddenly remembered the snap map though. Jake had his location turned on. We both figured that whoever had taken the phone would have likely turned it off, but we decided to look anyways just in case. As we checked, we saw the location was actually still on. It showed exactly on the map where his phone was. It was only about 10 minutes ago it had last been used. We compared it to Google Maps and soon found the exact address. To our surprise, it was a house that was only a 10-minute drive from where we were. Jake and I both decided to go to the house together. We left Jake's house and got into his car. Then we followed the directions to get to that address. None of us had been to this area of the neighborhood before. When we got there, we saw it didn't appear to be the best neighborhood. The houses were small and not very nice looking. They all seemed run down and the yards were overgrown. We saw several broken down looking cars. Nevertheless, we parked on the side of the road in front of the house. We both got out and walked up to the front door. We then confirmed that this was in fact where his phone had been. Jake firmly knocked on the front door. After a few seconds, we saw the curtains from the front window open for just a split second. We looked over to see somebody ducking back and shutting the curtains quickly. They clearly did not want to be seen. Jake then shouted from the other side of the door. He said he'd lost his phone earlier in the day, and the location was showing it had to be here. He said the only thing he wanted was his phone back, and they could just throw it out the door to him and we would leave. We got nothing in response. About a minute later, though, we heard a noise coming from behind the house. Somebody was back there and outside now. This was a really bad idea, but we decided to go around back and confront them. We left the front step and walked around the side of the home. We hadn't even made it around to the backyard yet when Jake spoke again. He basically said the same thing that he had said before. All he wanted was his phone returned to him. He was mad that somebody had stolen it, so I guess I can't really blame him. All of a sudden, though, we heard some yelling and the sound of people running. There were men's voices, and they were telling us to get the fuck out of there. I saw for a brief second at least 3 men running full speed at us. Jake and I took off. The guys were a ways back, but approaching quickly. We ran into the front yard and then into the street. The guys were going so fast behind us that we wouldn't be able to make it to Jake's car and get inside on time. Instead, we were forced to run past his car and further down the street. We were both decently fast guys, but the people behind us seemed to be almost as fast as we were. We made it to the end of that street, and then ran into the next one over. The guys behind us seemed to stop chasing us at that point. There was a little park, so we ran in there and hid behind some trees. We stopped to catch our breath, and we tried to figure out what to do. We stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, then carefully crept our way back to Jake's car. When we got to his car, we didn't see anybody outside or near the house. After that, we just left. We went back to Jake's, and he said he would just have to buy a new phone, he guessed. At least we had tried to get it back. Looking back at that night, we probably should have not gone to the house by ourselves. It could have been far more dangerous, but we didn't really think about it. The location on Jake's phone was turned off after that incident, so I don't know what happened to it. I do know that Jake ended up getting a new phone. Several decades ago, my grandfather used to have this crazy neighbor who lived on a ridge overlooking his home in central Missouri. The guy was an insane conspiracy nut who didn't allow electronics of any kind on his property and refused to recognize the local police department's authority over him. People in the neighborhood called him Tanner. I guess you could label him as what's now called a sovereign citizen. The guy had a various arsenal of weapons, killed animals for meat, brewed his own booze, and grew his own vegetables. My grandpa lost track of how many times the police drove past his house to climb the ridge and confront that man. There was once even a standoff that lasted most of the day, where the guy refused to leave his house until cops had to pull his front door off with a chain tied to a truck. He would spend brief periods of time in jail for disorderly conduct, hunting on other people's private property, and resisting arrest. He would always return home eventually, though. The cops warned my grandfather's family that the guy was not to be approached for any reason, and if there was ever a problem, to just call them instead. They reported that Tanner set traps in his own property and had shackles and chains in his back room. My grandfather has only one distinct memory of him. One winter, he was smoking on his back porch when the crack of a rifle being fired way too close made him jump in surprise. A short-tailed hawk fell out of the sky, bouncing off the porch railing right next to him, and landed on his lawn. My grandfather looked up in shock as the hawk thrashed on the ground. From the ridgeline up above, he heard a man yell, "Don't touch that one, he's mine." My grandfather shouted back at Tanner that he would call the cops if he came down onto his property. He then went back inside and locked the door. Where the real story starts, though, is in the spring sometime in the early 80s. A rust-colored panel van broke down on my grandfather's street, and the driver pulled off to the side. He parked right on the dirt paths that led up to Tanner's place, probably not even realizing it was supposed to be a driveway. A few hours later, there was a pounding on my grandfather's door. He found 3 very large men there, asking if he was the one who broke into their van and stole all their stuff. My grandfather, not without good reason, pointed them up the hill towards Tanner's place, and the 3 made their way up the dirt path. From here, I'm going to speak about what the police eventually reported to my grandfather. The 3 men kicked in Tanner's door when they arrived. The first one through the door stepped into a bear trap that was laid out on the floor in the dark hallway. Then Tanner, who had apparently been waiting for them outside in the bushes, hit the other 2 with bear mace and forced them down the hall into his back room, where he attempted to subdue them and chain them to the wall. They escaped nearly blind, and one of them stumbled into what the police described as a barbed wire net that Tanner had set up near his back door. From down the ridge, my grandfather sat by his shed and waited to hear the commotion, but when he started hearing screams and gunshots, he called the police. When the police arrived, they found the front door wide open and several small traps set throughout the house, including an axe that was made to swing down from the ceiling. One of the men was found shackled in the back room with a knife shoved through his hand. The man in the net had been shot 4 times and was let to bleed out. Tanner was nowhere to be found. When my grandfather asked what happened to the third man, the police reported there were only 2 found in the house. Both men survived and were taken to the hospital, but afterwards they were arrested for outstanding warrants. The police didn't specify, but they implied that they had been smuggling drugs or stolen goods in that van, and that's what Tanner had stolen from them. Tanner himself was never seen after that, though my grandfather did hear a report on the radio a few years later of a man matching his description that had been found dead in a ditch in Kentucky after being tortured. I always considered that one of the craziest home invasion stories I've ever heard. To this day, my family still jokes around about the missing bear trap man. Shortly after that happened to my grandfather, he moved across state to a different home. He did return once to his old house just for a look, and he could have sworn he noticed somebody looking down at him from the hill above, but maybe that was just a remnant of the past. This story happened years ago when my friends and I were really into Pokemon. This objectively may not be the scariest story you've ever heard, but to me it's one of the most unnerving things that's ever happened to me. When I think about the implications of what happened, I still can't believe people are this horrible. As I said before, my friends and I really like Pokemon. The cards were cool, but we were fans of the games more so, and we loved to play them competitively. At the time, the game Sun and Moon had just come out. They were being heavily promoted at gaming and Nintendo conferences across the country. A gaming event was coming to our hometown, and the new Sun and Moon games were going to be heavily featured, as well as a rumored competitive battle tournament. Needless to say, we could not miss this event. Let's fast forward a few months. We got our tickets and were excited about this event. We later learned that you needed to qualify for the tournament though. We hadn't done so, so we were a bit upset about that. We were still excited about the experience nonetheless. At the very least, we could be spectators for the top-level competitive play, which sounded awesome. We weren't exactly sports guys, so this was kind of like our own version of the Super Bowl. We spent the entire day taking pictures, talking to other Poke fans, and watching battles in the main convention hall. Around 4 in the afternoon, I was confronted by a taller man who looked like an official of the event. He was wearing the same khakis and polo shirts as the staff and had a laminated badge hanging on a lanyard around his neck. He had a very confident and professional tone. He leaned in and spoke to me. "Hey there, friend. I can't help but notice you and your friends there look like superfans. Is that correct?" "Of course," I answered with an energetic response. Being at these types of events with other people who share your interests always pumps you up and you feel real energetic. He laughed and we made some small talk for a while. One thing led to another, and then the man said this. "Well, the reason I approached your little group today is for an unbelievable offer. You see, I work for Nintendo and we're planning on unveiling a new battle mechanic in the next Pokemon game. We need some folks to test the mechanics. Would you and your friends be interested?" I didn't even respond to the man. I just bowed my head and shook his hand. I was so excited I couldn't even think of the words to say. One of my friends who was standing there started to jump up and down like he'd just won the lottery. The man laughed a bit. Okay. You guys have to keep this quiet though, since obviously we haven't announced the new game yet. Meet me and my team at this location tonight at 8 p.m. and we'll start our testing. Remember though, you can't say anything. Oh, and my secretary will have you fill out some non-disclosure agreements when you arrive at the location. Alright? The man handed me a handwritten note with an address written on it. The paper was signed with a name that was pretty much illegible. Before anybody out there starts judging us, remember we were young and naive. The atmosphere of the event had us thinking about what we wanted instead of what was clearly logical, and this man was dressed as if he was a member of staff. When he was talking about non-disclosure agreements and all that stuff, it made him sound more legitimate. I was about to realize just how stupid and idiotic me and my friends truly were, though. We stayed at the event for a few more hours, then made our way to the address the man had given us. We pulled into this lot right next to a big abandoned-looking building. There was an old furniture store sign above the door of the building, which told us the building used to be some sort of furniture warehouse that was clearly not in business anymore. We lingered in the car for a minute or so. The situation was clearly kind of weird. We justified the weirdness by convincing ourselves they must need a secure location to test sensitive material. The guy gave us no reason not to trust him, other than the fact he didn't give us a name or a business card, but we wouldn't think about that little variable until later. There were about 6 cars in the parking lot, so we figured that someone must definitely be inside. It didn't take a lot of convincing ourselves that this was a legit opportunity, and we would really regret it if we passed it up. Against all our better judgment, we got out of the car and slowly made our way to the door. It was locked, so we knocked rather hard, but there was no answer. We looked through the glass on the door. It looked like a dark and abandoned warehouse. One of our friends suggested we should just leave, but everyone else pretty much ignored him. We all wanted this to really be real. While we were standing out front trying to figure out what to do, we heard a grinding sound. We looked at the side of the building, only to see an overhead door opening, the type meant for trailers to unload. A very skinny and frail-looking woman came out and told us to come on over so we could get started. We all felt a little bit of hesitation towards this woman. Her appearance looked nothing like someone who would be in a professional setting. Her hair was greasy, her clothes were messed up, they even seemed to be tattered and covered in holes. Most notably though, she was swaying back and forth as she was trying to summon us. I just happened to look through the window on the door one last time before we started walking over, and I saw 2 people crouched next to the overhead door. I hadn't seen them when we'd originally looked into the window, but after the door was open, the streetlight was shining in, and it was clear to see at that point. I didn't say anything. I just suddenly alerted my friends that we needed to leave. One of my friends said to the woman that we'd forgotten something in the car, and we'd be back in just one moment. We all started to move back toward the parking lot. The woman tried to say something, but it was completely incoherent. When we were just about to get in the car, we heard multiple footsteps behind us. As we entered the vehicle, we saw 2 people with the woman. All 3 of them were directly coming towards our car. We started it up and peeled out of there. We drove for hours. Thankfully, it didn't seem like they followed us, but we weren't exactly sure. That's why we drove nearly all night, just in case they did so. We did call the police and report this entire event, but the warehouse was completely empty by the time they arrived. At that point, they couldn't really do anything, since these people didn't physically harm us, I guess. I have no idea what these people wanted from us. It used to keep me up at night thinking about it. Be careful meeting people out there, and don't be afraid to ask serious questions, because sometimes things really can be too good to be true. I have a horror story from Snapchat that happened just last year. I use Snapchat quite a bit and communicate with my friends on there a lot. I post stories fairly frequently as well. I've had that account for almost 10 years, and over time I've accumulated a lot of friends on the app. When I post a story, sometimes friends will reply to them and say whatever they will. Now, starting last year, every time I posted anything, this one guy would seem to reply to it every time. I didn't know who he was or when I added him. His name on Snapchat was Dave. I don't have any idea when we first made contact or anything, but he would always say things that were sort of creepy. One example that stood out to me was when I posted a picture of my new apartment. The picture was just something standard, like of the living room and kitchen. He responded by saying, "I wish I knew where you lived." It was almost like he was purposely trying to be weird every time. I never bothered to delete him or anything though. I didn't really think it was too much of a problem. I mean, he never even attempted to contact me outside of these weird responses to my posts. Eventually though, I did get tired of it and deleted him from my account. I didn't really think anything of it after doing so, but the next day, a brand new account added me on Snapchat. I didn't know that it was him making a different one. I added this person back out of curiosity because I had no idea who it was. Immediately, he sent me a message asking why I deleted him. I realized who it was pretty quickly and deleted that account too. Not long after, he tried to add me again with another one, but I did not add him back this time. He kept trying using different usernames, but I knew that all of them were still him. The very next day, I got a text on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. I said hi and asked who it was. It took me until the third message for me to realize it was that same guy. He started cursing me out, calling me terrible things. He was very clearly angry at how I kept ignoring him. I blocked the number after he sent me about 20 texts in the span of 2 minutes. This couldn't stop him, however. As most of you know, there are apps and websites where you can get new phone numbers for free. I've never really used one, but I know that they exist. I'm guessing that's what this guy was doing. Because every time I'd block a number, I'd get another text a short while later, very clearly still him. Block that number, a short time later a new number would pop up. This time though, he left a voicemail. I listened to it. The man sounded much older than me. He basically called me every name in the book and threatened very graphic things against me. I blocked that number and this continued on for several days. I tried to ignore it as best I could. I kept on blocking these hundreds of numbers. Soon though, I decided to just get a new phone. I sort of needed one anyways. I decided to get a new number while I was at it and change my Snapchat username too. After I'd changed all my information, I guess I lost the guy. After that, I never heard from him again, and I really hope it continues to stay that way. Today, I was enjoying the nice weather at my local park. They have 2 pretty small loops, one a little more covered by trees, and one that circles around a small pond. When I got there, only a few other people were there, so I had my AirPods in one ear and was enjoying my music, singing to the open air. As I got closer to people, I would take my singing down to a lower volume, slightly louder than a whisper, to try and be considerate. While it is a public park, it's not much good to be a nuisance with other people there. People were smiling at me as I passed by, and everyone seemed to be in a really good mood. Well, I decided to go on the slightly more wooded and secluded path for my last lap before I headed home. There was an older man who passed by with his dog. We passed by each other no problem when I started to hear this weird, almost chirping sound. We were outside, so I assumed it was bugs at first, but it started getting louder and louder and less bug sounding. I briefly looked over my shoulder and realized it was an alarm or something getting closer to me. Another guy was walking behind me. He went to pass by me, and I noticed he had some weird plastic-looking rope in his hand, the kind they use around packages sometimes. It was the middle of the day, and we were in a pretty public space where I didn't feel too unsafe. I was just a little bit confused. That is, until this man, as he was passing me by, looked me dead in the eye and whispered in my ear, "If that other guy wasn't here, I would have strangled you." Not really processing what he said in the moment, I got out a confused, "Really?" Dead serious, he said yes, and twisted the rope around in his hand. He continued walking, and I got a deep chill down my spine as the reality of what he just said sunk in. I texted my partner, and he immediately called me and stayed on the phone with me until I got home. I truly believe I would have been in danger if no one else was around. This happened to me personally about 15 years ago when I was a Girl Scout. We were staying at a campground this year, and one of the rules imposed upon us was that it was mandatory we have a buddy as part of a buddy system. That meant you were always supposed to have someone with you if you left the group, anytime, day or night. We spent the day doing activities at the campground, and when we all went to bed, I remember the cabin smelling very musty. None of the girls liked it much. I think it's one of the reasons I had a lot of trouble sleeping. The smell would just overcome me in waves and make me feel real uneasy. When I finally did manage to fall asleep though, I remember being awoken by my buddy in the bunk underneath me. She tapped me several times on the shoulder, but it wasn't until she poked my face that I really woke up. I was a little bit annoyed, but she said she really needed to go to the bathroom. And, as it was an annex to our cabin, I had to walk with her to make sure she got back safely. Still groggy, I agreed. I was just descending the ladder when I saw her start walking towards the door. I quickly threw on my slippers to catch up with her, as I didn't want her to get in trouble for me not being with her if an adult happened to be awake and walking by. I caught up to her just as she was opening the door, and I stood at the door of the restroom waiting patiently. I hoped all she needed to do was pee, as I was still quite tired. I waited for about a minute and asked if everything was okay. She shouted back that she wouldn't be long. I continued waiting. At least 15 minutes went by though, and my buddy still had not emerged from the stall. I was getting rather impatient now. I banged on the door, but this time there was no reply. I waited in silence for her to say something, but there was no response. At this point, I started to get worried, thinking that something must have happened to her. Maybe she fainted, or maybe she fell back asleep again. Thinking it was probably the latter, I bent down under the door of the stall to see if she was okay. Oddly enough though, I couldn't see anything inside. Not a pair of legs, not anything. I was not quite sure exactly what was going on, and it was very cold outside. The cold air for the last 15 minutes had really woken me up. I thought she must have been playing a prank on me of some kind. I went into the next cubicle and stood on the toilet to look in. However, when I looked down, there was no one in there. A feeling of pure dread engulfed me as the cubicle next to those two unlocked by itself, and the doors slowly began to swing open. I jumped down off the toilet and tried to hide. I could hear a voice from the next door over, whispering something to me. I was too scared to listen though. I ran all the way back to the cabin without looking back. When I got back to my bunk, I saw my buddy was already back there, fast asleep on the bed underneath mine. I just about shit myself, and I couldn't sleep a wink that night. I never told anyone my experience, and continued as a Girl Scout until I became a troop leader myself. It was at this point in my life when I was a lot older, and happened to be chatting to some older scout leaders about camps and cabins in our local area for some of our troops, when all of a sudden we started talking about the same campground I had my experience at. She told us she really didn't like going there, because years ago when she was a young girl, some person she didn't know tried to lure her out of the bathroom. I use Snapchat a lot to talk to friends. I never thought I would have a scary experience on it. There have been times people have added me and I didn't really know who they were, but nothing strange ever happened because of that. Usually it was either just a bot or somebody I'd never heard from. Well, one day I got added on Snapchat by somebody I didn't know yet again. The name was very generic sounding. I believe it was John Johnson or something like that with no space between the first and last name. Seemed pretty fake to me. Immediately, this person sent me a picture. I opened it, and the very first thing I saw was a close-up picture of a guy wearing a really creepy-looking mask. The mask fully covered his face and was almost the same tone as his skin color. It was smiling so you could see all the teeth. The eyes also appeared to be all white. It was very weird to see. I figured it was some kind of joke. I did not send a picture back, but responded by asking who this was. He sent another picture of basically the same thing. I was creeped out by it and did not respond again. Instead, I just blocked his account. I didn't even know who he was, but I really didn't appreciate him sending me creepy pictures like that. After that, I was not added by any other accounts for the rest of the night. I also didn't get any more strange messages either. The story does not end there though. I work an office job that's about 15 minutes away from where I live, and right by the city. I'm there in the office every weekday. One day after work, I was leaving. I park in a parking garage that's attached to the building. I was up on the 3rd level. By now, there were quite a few cars still around, but it wasn't as packed as when I'd got there. I got inside my car when something caught my eye. There was a man walking through the parking garage, wearing the exact same mask I had seen in that Snapchat. I didn't waste any time. I drove away immediately. I didn't want to wait to see that guy get into a car and try and follow me or something. The whole way home, I couldn't believe I had seen that. It had to be the exact same guy. Somehow he knew who I was. He was wearing that exact same creepy mask too. After that day, I didn't see him again. I did try to report the incident, but nothing came of it, and I still don't know who that guy was to this very day. I remember it was a Friday. I woke up early in the morning to get up for work. I dragged myself out of bed and into the kitchen to make my coffee. I took very light steps into my daughter's bedroom and gave her a kiss on the head, trying not to wake her up. I then tiptoed back to the kitchen and grabbed my coffee. "Good morning," I heard my daughter call out from behind me. I turned around and replied, "Good morning, sunshine." I told her to go grab her stuff and get ready for school. She walked back to her room and I heard silence for a while. I walked in and saw her asleep in her bed. I woke her up and tried to keep her awake. I asked her why she was so tired. Her reply was the most bone-chilling thing I'd ever heard. Let me remind you that she was only 8 years old. "Well, there's this really scary guy who visits me at night." That was already weird enough, so I asked her to elaborate further. "You mean in your dreams?" She told me, "No, Daddy, when I'm awake he comes out and tells me scary stories. They really keep me up." She started trying to look around me, like she was trying to look into her closet or something. I got up to go check out the closet, and of course there was nothing there but clothes. I made sure to tell her that if this person ever came back again to let me know. "But Dad, I shouldn't have told you at all. He said if I told anyone he'd hurt me." I replied, "No one will hurt you as long as I'm here, okay?" After that, I took her to school. I went to work, and at work, my boss and I were having a conversation. I ended up telling him about the closet creature. He laughed and told me it was just her imagination probably. His kids had had their own phase about this sort of thing. I laughed too, but honestly, I was a bit weirded out about it. After work, I picked up my daughter, and we went home. I made us some dinner and asked her with curiosity to draw this thing in her closet. She did so. It only had a little bit of hair, a white face, and a pointy nose that was black around his eyes and what appeared to be blood on his clothes or something. Even as a grown man, this scared me a bit. What the hell was happening to make my daughter dream about such disturbing things? I tried not to show how unsettled I was, though. I wanted to know for sure if this was actually a dream, or if she was seeing something in real life that was making her think about this. That night, I peeked into her room every 30 minutes or so. It must have been 1 in the morning, and I was still up. I had work the next day, but I couldn't go to bed without knowing, because either way, my daughter had a problem, and I needed to help her with it. To do that, though, I needed to know what was happening in the first place. I waited until she went to bed and peeked into her room every 30 minutes, like I said, to see what was going on. She was pretty quiet. She lay on her bed and most of the time was perfectly asleep. After 30 minutes passed by, I walked into her room again. I peeked around the corner. She was laying in her bed asleep. Before I went back to waiting for a little while longer, though, I looked up to the window next to her bed and I couldn't breathe. Similar to her drawing, but of course a bit different, there was what appeared to be a man in a clown getup tapping at her window. It looked like he was mouthing something to her, something like, "Hey, wake up!" At this point, I was outraged. I wasn't even thinking, really. I ran over to the window. The clown saw me before I actually reached him and took off running. I realized I should have gone out the front door and snuck up on this freak, but it was already too late. "Daddy, what's happening?" My daughter was awake now and very confused. I told her to stay put as I jumped out her window. Outside, I saw the guy running down the road as fast as he could. He was really taking off. Immediately, I called the police and filed a report. I wasn't going to be able to catch up with him with that much of a head start. It's been several weeks now, but they never found anyone matching the description. It scares the hell out of me knowing this freak is still out there, and he knows where we live as well. Later that night, or should I say that morning, I sat my daughter down and gave it to her straight. I drilled into her head that she's not supposed to talk to strangers, to anyone she doesn't know, and to keep her window shut and locked no matter what. I wasn't that confident in those measures, though, so I ended up boarding up that window anyway. No one would be getting in or out. For the longest time, my daughter always slept in my bed. Jesus, that was the most awful experience. It scares me knowing what kind of perverts and freaks are out there. I try not to think about what could have happened had he ever gotten inside. What about the part of him being in the closet, though? I asked my daughter about it, and she said he used to sneak in and sleep in there. This incident happened in a flat when I was 6 or 7 years old. I remember this very clearly still to this day, and it makes my spine shiver thinking about it. I had the largest bedroom in the flat. My mom had decorated the walls with pink and lavender paint and cute little metallic swirls. I had bunk beds, glittery curtains in my windows, charms and glittery things hanging from the ceiling. Any girl like me's dream. I remember getting into bed that night, and everything seemed normal at first. My room usually wasn't too dark because the moonlight shining through my window through my glittery curtains. I was trying to sleep for what seemed like a while when, I don't know why, but I started to look around my room, particularly in the alcove area in the dark corner. I couldn't focus my eyes properly for a minute. But when I did, I noticed a head of one of those plastic lady things you do makeup on. Her hair really stood out in the moonlight against the dark, creepy corner. I remember going to lay back down in my bed when suddenly I had the urge to look back up. As I did, I was paralyzed with fear. At first, I thought I might be imagining it because I had been staring at that plastic lady head. But I swear I could see a dark woman's outline standing right next to it. It was like a dark gray-black mist, but in the shape of a woman. I slowly looked at it with massive bulging eyes, scanning over it. I saw she had no feet. There was nothing there. No shadow, no feet, nothing. It was like she was levitating 10 inches off the ground, and it seemed she was moving slowly towards me. I was absolutely terrified. I'll always remember this because of how cripplingly scary it was and how I couldn't bring myself to move at all. All I could do was try my best to duck myself tighter under the quilt wrapped around me. There are no labels or anything that could have emulated what happened next. I was shaking, trying not to breathe loudly, not able to move at all, when I felt something behind me, leaning over me. I closed my eyes, when all of a sudden I felt a tickle on the back of my neck. You know, the feeling you get when someone unexpectedly puts their cold fingers on your skin. It started off like that, and quickly became more aggressive, tightening around the back of my neck as if someone was trying to keep a hold of me. I was trying to scream, but no words were coming out. I was sweating and shaking, and my neck was getting worse. It started to hurt badly. I tried to scream over and over, but all that would come out were these little squeaks. It was like I was gasping for air. I remember the moment when it was like everything snapped, and I was finally able to scream for my mother and move around. I screamed at the top of my lungs. It came out crackled like a blood-curdling cry for help. She came running in, and as soon as she flung open the door and a burst of light shone in through the room, the whole thing stopped immediately. She carried me to the front room, cradling me as I sobbed hysterically. Later in life, I found out what I experienced was a form of sleep paralysis. I didn't know that at the time, though. I thought a ghost had really tried to kill me or something. From then on, I had to sleep in my mom's bed for a while, and we moved out shortly after. I'm grateful we haven't had to go back to that house since. First, let me explain as to why I was traveling alone in this story. One of my best friends, Kayla, and I worked seasonally at a hiking lodge for the summer. We're both girls in our early 20s. She lives and goes to school in New Brunswick, and I live and work as a chef in Toronto. We decided this year, since I'd bought a car, instead of flying back home, we would do an epic Canadian coast-to-coast road trip. Everything was going wonderfully. So wonderfully, in fact, that we ended up staying a bit longer in a few unexpected places and had to cut our East Coast portion of the trip short. Now, my friend Kayla started her schooling on November 1st. I dropped her off at home in New Brunswick on Halloween and stayed the night at her place, planning to head back to Toronto the next day. After a few glasses of Chardonnay and some laughs, I decided I could not come this close to the East Coast and not see the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia. Knowing I still had a week more of vacation before my winter contract, I hastily booked a hostel for the next day, November 1st at the Escalates Hostel on Cabot Trail. When I booked, only one option came up. I assumed because I had waited until the last minute to book a private dorm with a queen-sized bed. This option was for $35 though. I thought to myself, what a bargain. I booked immediately. I left Kayla's house at 7 a.m., knowing it was going to be a long drive to my destination. The Cabot Trail was roughly 150 kilometers long. So I thought to be safe, I'd plug the hostel's address into my Google Maps and head straight there to get my bearings. I would arrive at the hostel at roughly noon. Knowing it was too early to check in, I figured I'd consult with the front desk when I arrived, figure out the nearby hiking trails, and bring my bags in at least. I was about to arrive at my hostel, at least according to Google Maps. All around me, though, was nothing but farmland. Google instructed me that my destination was on my left, but I saw nothing at all. About 50 yards up the road, I saw a wire bar bent to look like the letter A, spray-painted bright red. I was staying at the Acolyte hostel, so I guess that must be the place. I followed the dirt road, and it led me as to what I can only describe as a dilapidated barn. There was no signage at all. There were 2 cars parked out front, so I parked alongside and got out of my car to try and figure out where I was. Once I got out, a smallish man in his mid-40s with dark hair and very intense eyes popped out of the barn right away and asked me if I was staying with them tonight. I said yes, and he asked why I'd booked so last minute. I explained my situation to him, and seemingly satisfied with my answer, he insisted on taking me on the grand tour of the barn. The first thing I noticed was that the entirety of the barn had been dug out around its foundation, about 5 feet deep or so. He led me across some particle board that was laid down as a sort of ramp leading inside. The second thing I noticed about this property was that there were no windows at all. This was clearly a barn meant for livestock. The gentleman leading me on this tour was named Kevin. He proceeded to tell me his grand plans for this space. It all seemed really far-fetched. All I could see was an old barn with particle boards separating most of the rooms. He led me up some skeleton stairs made of plywood and random 2x4s to the cabin loft where I would be sleeping that night, along with his family, the mother of his 5-year-old son, his son, and Kevin's own mother, who insisted I call her Mom as well. The upstairs was certainly an open concept. A frail curtain was all that separated the beds. To the side was a large open area in the middle. I asked if I was his only occupant that night, and he said yes. I had a feeling he didn't often get many stayers. I told him I was interested in the hikes in the area and wanted to go to them before it got dark. He gave me a very detailed instruction of his favorite trails and how to get to them. Off I went. I figured the place was certainly not ideal. I wish the website would have let me know it was still being built. But hey, I booked it last minute and beggars can't really be choosers. Plus, the man was very friendly and helpful with hiking advice. I hiked the area until it started getting dark. I didn't pack enough food for the day, but I figured I'd be heading into town for dinner anyway. The nearest town was clearly a booming tourist destination during the summer, but now in the off-season it was basically a ghost town. It was such a ghost town, even the liquor store was closed for the off-season. Finally, I found a dark and dingy empty bar to eat dinner. It was, to phrase it lightly, disappointing. I had this super romantic image in my head of me sitting there on the harbor front, sipping on bubbly, slurping back some ocean-fresh oysters. That was not what I got, needless to say. Being exhausted, I figured I should just head back up to the hostel and read my book. I got back around 8 p.m. I could smell the family that lived there was in the midst of cooking dinner. A boy ran down the wood steps to greet me. He yelled, as little boys always do, "My name's JP. What's yours?" "Nice to meet you, JP. My name is Alex." He asked me if I wanted to come play. I said definitely. Just let me put my bags down in my room first. He followed me through the translucent curtains to my room. Instead of getting settled in, I headed straight out to the main area. I started throwing a foam ball around with JP. His mother, father, and grandmother all just sat down to eat, staring at us right in front of them without saying anything. At some point, the mother and father started what seemed like a random argument, which turned into them full-blown screaming at each other. Completely weirded out, I told JP I needed to go to my room and call my mom, as she was surely wondering where I was. Of course, the boy didn't understand proper boundaries yet, and followed me through my curtains. He sat on my bed as well. I tried taking his attention away from his family's fierce fighting, so I started asking him where he went to school, what his favorite color was. His mother started calling for him. He didn't answer, and instead chose to sit on my lap and hug me. Not wanting to cause any problems, I yelled to the mother that he was in my room. She ran in and snatched him, then yelled to the father. I know what you're like when you get this angry. I'm taking JP, so don't follow us. I heard her book it down the stairs and him running after her. I heard a car start up in the lot and not just drive away, but peel out of the driveway. I heard the man cursing, the door slamming, and the sound of the excavator I had seen outside earlier that day coming on. I guess he wanted to do some handiwork to let off some steam. Now I was just left upstairs. I walked out of my not-so-private curtain room with my bag and said, "Listen, you guys have been great hosts and all, but I think I should really get going." The grandma started grabbing my arm and telling me to stay. I was about ready to tell her to screw off and just leave until I realized she still had the knife in her hand from cooking dinner. I went along with what she was saying while she rubbed my arm with one hand and flailed the knife around with the other. I inched closer and closer downstairs and toward the door. She kept rubbing my arm and shoulders with her free hand, telling me to stay and that her grandson was real special. Before I'd even booked the night's stay, he'd had a premonition that I would be staying with them. As soon as I got out the door, I ran towards my car and started the engine. I backed up to get out of there. Kevin, with his excavator, had blocked the path out with a 5-foot ditch. He got out and said he was sorry and told me I had to stay. He'd make it up to me. The grandma came out with a knife still in her hand, saying it was all Kevin's fault I was leaving. They started to really bicker. I yelled that if they didn't let me leave right now, I was calling the police. They got super defensive, like I was the one being unreasonable. I started to dial on my phone. Kevin got back in his excavator and made a little path so I could get out. I drove across the grass and ripped out of the drive. I'm sure it did a number on my suspension. As soon as the property was out of sight, I went to call my friend Kayla. No service at all. I drove 6 hours and stayed with Kayla instead. At the time this happened, I was 14, and weirdly enough, I was going to the circus that was in town. If I remember correctly, the place was called the Clown's Nest or something. It had quite a weird name, I know, but I was going and I was pretty excited. I bought my ticket and some popcorn and went in and took a seat. The backstage door opened slightly, and inside I could see what looked like a man in his early 40s with green dyed hair. I sat back and relaxed, waiting for the show to start. There were 3 other clowns, 2 men and a woman. The woman was real skinny, and one of the men was really tall and muscular. The second guy and third clown was the one I had seen backstage just a few moments ago. He had green hair and red lipstick with white makeup, but had black eyes which must have been contact lenses. The clowns ran around throwing flowers to the audience down below. A man with black spandex covering his body ran and climbed a pole and jumped on a trampoline doing some tricks. I noticed that the older man clown was staring at one particular area in the audience. The show went on for a while longer when I heard a raspy voice to my left. A few minutes ago, a man and his daughter had sat down right next to me, and recently that man had gotten up to go to the bathroom, or go to the concession stand, I guess. I'm not sure which. I decided to listen in since something weird was going on here just from the vibe I was getting. The voice asked this little girl, "Hey kiddo, you want to go backstage?" The whole situation sounded freaky. When I heard this though, I turned to my left immediately. There was that clown very creepily standing next to the girl. Better yet, the girl actually said yes. The clown then said this to her, "I shit you not. No worries, you get some special perks cause I'm your dad's friend." They stood up and started to walk off. Being both weirded out and very worried, I decided to follow behind them. I couldn't help but think this guy must be a freak. Before they actually made it backstage, I couldn't bear this any longer. I ran over and grabbed the girl's hand. They both looked surprised and stared over at me. I told her I'd buy her and her dad some popcorn if she came back to her seat quietly, and I'd give her some candy as well. She said okay. while the clown made a very angry face and stomped away. I don't really know what he had been planning, but I couldn't help but feel furious at this guy anyway. Like I had promised, I took the girl back to her seat, bought her and her dad popcorn, and gave her some candy I had. I explained to her dad what happened, and he thanked me. We actually ended up walking home together. As we talked, he wanted to thank me once more for what I did, and said he'd be sure not to leave his daughter alone again like that. They both walked inside their house, and I began my own walk home. It turned out my place was only a couple of blocks down anyway. I couldn't help but notice, though, that behind me was a man in a hood that had been following us for quite a while. I didn't want to be a jerk and immediately assumed the guy was a creeper, but after making so many turns and following us for so long, he was still following me. As I continued walking, when I finally turned onto my own sidewalk, I turned around abruptly and asked the man if I could help him with something. I then heard that same raspy voice from before. No, I was just looking around. I told him okay, but he should probably be getting home now. It was about midnight around this time. He then replied that he thought my house was for sale and he wanted to go visit it. I told him it was not for sale, and I told him so long. I told him I had some buddies waiting on me. When I turned around, though, I heard him say there were no friends waiting on me. This kind of freaked me out, because I had been lying to make sure he knew there were other people not so far away. I didn't reply this time. I just kept walking and went inside. I immediately looked out the window to see this guy just standing there for the longest time. I was nervous to call the cops because I'd never done that before, but I was getting pretty scared. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, staring at this guy. He was just on the sidewalk looking toward the house. He didn't move a single inch. Eventually, the freak blew a kiss at me and walked away. The next day, I told my parents what happened. I think they believed me, but they found the story quite funny, which kind of irritated me. To this day, I don't trust any clowns. If I had a moral to the story, it'd be to always look after your kids. It only takes a few seconds for a strange old man to take them, and you never know who that old man could be. I remember waking up from the nap to the sound of my girlfriend sobbing somewhere else in the home. I got up to see what was wrong and determined the sound must be coming from downstairs. I followed the sound down the spiral staircase all the way to the finished basement. The sound was definitely coming from the little half bathroom at the bottom of the stairs that we rarely ever used. The door was also closed, which it never was. I couldn't see any light coming from underneath, but the sound was very loud. It was obviously coming from the bottom of these stairs. It was about this time I started to fully wake up, and suddenly I remembered my girlfriend had already left for the grocery store when I'd started my nap. I could see her parking spot from one of the windows, and her car was not there. Obviously, she wasn't home. I called out her name, and the sobbing instantly stopped. I couldn't hear anything further. When I finally got the courage to go down those steps and open the door, the bathroom was completely empty. I never found out who the sobber was, but it was definitely a creepy experience. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.